My name is Ana Molero. I'm the Chief Government Officer at Teach for All, but I'm here in my role as informal secretary of the People First community. We wanted to start by thanking the Ford Foundation for hosting us in this beautiful space, in this beautiful day, to bring together members of the People First community and also others who are newer to this effort. And for those who are newer, let me just share a little bit about the People First community and our beliefs. So the People First community is a cross-sectoral group of practitioners, donors, researchers, and other public and private sector organizations who share a belief around the importance of prioritizing investing in leadership development as a path to sustainable development. And our effort is part of the broader movement to foster locally led development alongside other like-minded efforts such as localization agendas, community-driven approaches, or initiatives to reimagine the current development paradigm. So our belief in the community is that our best path for reaching a more equitable and sustainable world is to prioritize investing in people first, investing in cultivating the agency and the leadership of people over technical interventions and solutions. And we think that we haven't had enough focus on the international development field to invest in leadership development. And when we have done so, it hasn't been with the objective of developing leadership that's collective, locally driven, and diverse. So we're going to hear more about this from distinguished guests. I'm very excited about that. So before we begin the panel, just wanted to let you know there are small cards there with a QR code with our working paper and also a link to register to the community. So before further ado, let me hand it over to Wendy Kopp, who's our moderator and is the CEO and co-founder of Teach for All. Wendy, over to you.
Thank you, Ana, and thank you everyone for joining us this morning. Is this working? Can you all hear me okay? Maybe now. Okay, there we go. Well, I'm so thrilled about this very distinguished panel and the discussion we're about to have. And let me just start by sharing why I believe that this is such an important discussion to be having now. I know I'm preaching to the choir to say that the pandemic and the ways that it has exacerbated the inequities in our health and education and economic systems and accelerating climate change have been huge setbacks on the path to sustainable development. And the challenges we face are complex and adaptive, and there's no way that top-down solutions are going to solve them. We will need to shift our development paradigm and put the power in local leaders and invest in them so that they can drive the solutions and continuously improve and learn from each other over time. And what I've seen through our experience across Teach for All is just the power in our realm of education and working with children, like the power of investing in diverse leaders who teach and then lead schools and school systems and become policymakers and social innovators. And what we've seen through our work is that systems change not from governments alone, but when we have what we've come to call collective leadership, meaning leaders working at every level of the system, working together and collaborating, learning with each other, and again, continuously improving over time. We've also seen that fostering that kind of collective leadership takes intentional investment in people, in their sense of purpose and vision, their sense of agency, their mindsets, their inclination and ability to work together with each other. It takes exposing them to the principles that undergird success in other communities. And what we've seen is that when we make that investment, that's the path to the kind of sustainable development that enables us to operate with vision and agility in the face of such complex challenges. So I am thrilled to have here a group of people who each from very different perspectives have put people first in their efforts to achieve sustainable development. And as you know, this panel needs no introduction, but we have Her Excellency Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the former president of Liberia, and also the founder of the Presidential Center for Women and Development. She was the first elected female head of state in Africa and led Liberia through, post-Civil War, the recovery and resilience of her country, and through the Ebola crisis as well. We have Anne-Marie Burgoyne, who leads all the philanthropic work at Emerson Collective and has built such an incredible community of grantees investing in their coaching and mentorship, and who also has served on the board of more than 30 NGOs, which is remarkable. We have Darren Walker, the president of the Ford Foundation, who has led in philanthropy for more than 20 years and who has leveraged his vast experience and perspective, lived experience of inequity to chart a new path here at Ford towards equity and social justice. And finally, Karen Wakoli, who has devoted her life to investing in leadership development of young men and women in Kenya through the Emerging Leaders Foundation, which she launched and has led. And she's also now the interim executive director of the Emerging Public Leaders Foundation, which is working across Africa to invest in the leadership development of public servants. So I'm going to ask President Sirleaf to get us started by sharing a bit about what your journey has shown you about how leadership is cultivated.
Thank you. After about 5 years of work with a great team at the End Malaria Council, at Global Fund, and at the Africa CDC, yesterday was a great day for me because we virtually announced the launching of the Catalytic Fund of the Africa First Financing Facility. And that facility is meant specifically to train community health workers. And the basis for this, I worked in Liberia, leader in Liberia, president of Liberia, and all of our allocations, we never figured on community health workers until Ebola struck. And when Ebola struck, and we had a prediction that 1 million people, 1 million Liberians would die within a matter of a year. I then saw the power of people because I called all the community leaders and announced that I was going to reject this prediction, and that it was their responsibility to save lives and livelihoods. And they would work with their leaders in communities to ensure that we had those frontliners in the communities, like health workers, that would recognize symptoms, that we have it reported, and we do something about it. And I dare to say that although over 5,000 of our people died, but I think Liberia was able to solve Ebola in record time. And because of that, and because I knew that during all of these periods, our community workers were the ones who can recognize symptoms of different types of other diseases, like malaria. I focused on how are we going to do it. And so, like I say, yesterday we launched the Catalytic Fund. We hope that through the Africa First we'll change 200 community workers before 2030. That's not a lot, but I think there's the African Union, which is the one that's promoting some of this, or the African Center for Disease Control, is something that is hoping that we can get more than that. We can get over 2 million healthcare workers spread over African countries. And one of the things that it took was leadership to be able to overcome fears, leadership to be able to overcome those that had lost faith and confidence in their own people. I mean, I experienced that as president when, during the period of Ebola, everybody said, you know, it's the government that's fueling these things, you know, because they need the power. But like I say, I came to that. But the other experience that I like to share with you is the one about training and training people for leadership. And once again, we had just a great relationship with, I don't know if she's here, I don't want to embarrass her if Betsy Williams in the room. But she was doing some work in Liberia, and we noticed about the capacity of our civil service and wanted to know how we going to improve upon this. And so together we established the President's Young Professional Program and started. And what did it take? Liberia had already focused on training people abroad because the quality of our educational system was low. And so we had to send people to be, you know, to be trained properly and to come back. But most of them that left didn't come back. And so but even if we had, that would have meant shifting resources from the building of our own institutions that would be able to serve a larger number of people, you know, than sending them abroad to have specialized training in one or two people. But we also know that all the years of our war, capacity had been so affected that basically being able to manage the government was quite a problem. Yes, at the high levels, we were able to repatriate some of our citizens, but at the working level, it just wasn't there. And so with that, we were able to take graduates from the local institutions, recruited in a professional way so that we identified those that had the potential and the talent to be able to work with others, high-level people who represented repatriates that could work with them as mentors, and that together they could improve the capacity of those workers to be able to carry on the basic functions of government. And with that we had, and I can say that the President Young Professional Program has now expanded so much that it became the emerging public leaders, starting so small in a small country like Liberia, had so much potential that we were able to move it into Ghana. And a major program in Ghana, working with the Public Service Commission in Ghana, now has a program, real good program going, and now into Kenya. And we were there to launch the program in Kenya. That's going very well too. And while you may say in Ghana and Kenya, these are countries that really have capacity, but just that partnership of bringing in the experiences of young people, learning together with each other, and sharing the kinds of approaches that they take to exchange, looking at their own policy responses to things, made such a big difference that the EPL has gained a recognition far beyond its resource capacity. And I believe we plan to see them move now into Francophone Africa, and that's to me one of my biggest challenges, so that we have a program that transcends the barriers that sometimes we face in language, in systems, and all of that. And by moving into fluoride countries like Cote d'Ivoire, or Senegal, or others, we can break those barriers and see how we might, in our African Union, find common policy responses to the issues of education, to issues of training people to prepare them for governance. And so that's some of the things, like I say, we've been doing. I mean, it's just exciting to sit with these young people.
Thank you so much.
And
this is exactly
so I learn from
what
them.
we're
I
talking
don't
about.
teach them. I learn from them. And they tell me what to do, and I obey.
Yeah. This is exactly what we're talking about. And I think your example is so rare. We live in a world where we think in terms of interventions, like we need to solve a problem, so let's figure out what works and try to spread it across. And what you're articulating is such a powerful people-first approach. Let's invest in the people of Liberia and across Africa to drive the development. Let me ask you, Darren, in our previous conversations, you've spoken a bit about the history of this and about the fact that, in fact, foundations and other government entities have, in fact, invested in leadership development over time. And I'm curious if can you share a little bit more about the history of that and what that's told you about the kinds of investments we need to make today?
Thank you, Wendy. It's a great honor to be here and to be on this panel with these amazing sheroes of mine. Obviously, at the Ford Foundation, we have invested in leadership for some 7 decades now. And I think as we look over the Ford Fellows, I think there are many, many leaders we are proud of who were Ford Fellows, from Kofi Annan to Bartan Gregorian. I could go on with the list. But there's a lot we learned that we did wrong. And I really want to focus on that because it's really easy for us to get excited about the idea of people first. It's not hard to actually get a group of people to come into a room and say, yes, we're for people first. Of course. The challenge is for institutions to internalize in their behavior, their internal policies, their own mechanisms, what that really means. And that's where there's a disconnect. So you have institutions, you have leaders of institutions saying, people first, and then you look at their actual policies. So let's get really granular. So one of the things we learned, for example, in our work in Latin America, saying we wanted to support grassroots, community-based leaders. Well, if you're going to work in Brazil, and anyone who knows anything about Latin America and Brazil, people who are Afro-descendants, indigenous, are not bilingual. They don't have an opportunity to go to schools like white Brazilians do, where they learn English, right? And so it's one of the reasons when I became president of Ford, and I said, why is it that we've never had an Afro-Brazilian well, because they're not bilingual usually. Well, why aren't they bilingual? They're not bilingual because there's a biased, racist education system that prevents Afro-Brazilians from learning English, which is critical to their own development and leadership on a global stage, right? So you have to be willing to invest in language skill building and development. You have to be willing to understand that, all right, this 2-year program maybe a 3-year program, because the first year is really going to be language immersion and culture and some of the soft. So you got to pay for that, right? So it's really at a very granular level, getting to the operationalizing the rhetoric, and that is where we institutions, including my own institution, has failed in the past. The other thing is, if you believe in real leadership in countries, you have to build institutions in those countries, right? So you have to, if you believe in leadership in Africa, you have to build African institutions.
Yep.
And again, we can't internalize that. I mean, I mean, all of us. I mean, us. You know who I'm talking about. Donors, foundations, the World Bank, I mean, the whole ecosystem that was created, you know, some 7 decades ago, cannot internalize that actually we are not helping these institutions by simply project funding them to death. We are not project grants, especially the kind of project grants that give grantees 5%, 10% overhead, are not building institutions. You are not building institutions. Stop talking about it if you're doing it. So, and I say that to say, but it is really hard because then you have to bet on certain institutions because you can't fund everybody. So you're going to be criticized. And one of the ways in which the criticism and leadership development, and this is the final point, is we have to get beyond what is the easy thing to do. So one of the things we learned is, oh my goodness, you know, half the cohort are friends of important people in Nigeria, you know, or Kenya, or wherever. It's the finance minister's nephew. It's the neighbor of someone who knows the president. I mean, it's people, elites in these countries, right? And so we have to not actually replicate the very patterns we have in America in these other countries, but to actually understand, as we have learned in America, how you go beneath the kind of veneer of the low-hanging fruit who are, you know, have the language skills, who have been to very good schools generally, and who are able to pretty successfully adapt.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Darren, for highlighting especially the kinds of mindset shifts and work it actually takes to develop the locally rooted and diverse leadership that we need, which is really what we're talking about. Anne-Marie, can you share a bit about your philanthropic journey and kind of what's, you know, what is your perspective on the importance of investing in people first?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Is it? Oh gosh. I'm really honored to be here. I'm very, very appreciative. Maybe I'll make a couple observations. Me as a person was lucky enough to do, this is my second chapter of philanthropy. My first was built with Bill Draper, who was a venture capitalist, who was very involved with UNDP for many years. And Bill was always a huge fan of the leader. It was all about the leader. It really wasn't about the model. It wasn't about the program. It was about the leader. And when I came into the Emerson Collective opportunity with Lorene Powell Jobs, one of the things I appreciated about her was she'd done quiet philanthropy for a long time, and her goal was actually to, in some ways, organize and grow that. But she believed deeply in leaders too. And I'll say, in being leader first when we fund organizations, it's not at the expense of leadership teams that we think a lot about. One of the first questions we ask leaders is, where does the insight that you have into the community you serve come into your work? And there's another question that we'll often ask about, how do you gather knowledge, information, and data? And the data part is so easy to talk about because it's quantifiable, but so much of the work is actually about the stories of the work itself. And so that really is the amalgam of things that we try to better understand. I'll make an observation. When I came to Emerson Collective nearly a decade ago, two of our very early grantees, one was Teach for America, and one was Global Health Corps. And I mention those two organizations because we were already seeing that the people in those programs were literally populating the United States and populating the globe with their leadership, with the skills they'd learned, both together in learning environments and in practice, and then the way that cohort, which were often new people, they weren't the same people that were always coming into those opportunities, were then pulling along the people that they knew in the communities they were from. So that's one observation I would make. Another is we had been in partnership for many years, again, before I came, with Partners in Health, which I think is an excellent example of an organization, going back to Madam President's observations about the power of community health work. But community health work is about accompaniment. It is about listening. It is honestly, on some level, about taking a canon of knowledge you have, but bringing it to the place where you are, and then being in community with the people that are very proximate to you, that you both serve and that you work with, and then rolling that up to a more regional level, to a level where care can happen in another way. But there's a lot to be learned by that about how work can happen. And I will observe as I look at Last Mile Health and the work they've done in Liberia and the work they're continuing now to do in new countries. I think about Pivot Health in Madagascar, and if you haven't read their SSIR piece on the decolonization of their leadership structure, it is, I think, a very powerful piece and quite a good blueprint. And I'll say I was on a site visit recently. We did a set of site visits. I was in Zambia and Rwanda a few weeks ago. We did 8 site visits, and every one of them had some combination of Global Health core members that were there, and most of them had someone on their leadership team that was a Global Health Corps member, and that's in education, agriculture, and healthcare. So the way that those folks then come in to the market and see the way that they can lead, I think, is quite powerful. The last observation I'll make, and this is maybe as much for folks who are from the donor community, if you're finding inroads and you're trying to find those places where an inroad could work for you, I also look back on our early work with African Leadership Academy, African Leadership University. I look at something like the University of Global Health Equity, which I think is going to be a profoundly important player in both finding people who've always seen themselves as that caretaker in their community, but just need that opportunity. And then those individuals want to invest in places that haven't historically had healthcare infrastructure, but know that their deep mission is to both do that work and bring others along. Or the last example I'll give is an organization like Kepler University, which is in Rwanda, which I visited 3 times in the last decade. And the first time I went, they were in a very, very small space doing very, very powerful work. The second time I went, they were in the upper floor of a strip mall, literally, doing very powerful work. And when I was there 2 weeks ago, they're on a 12-acre campus and are building housing and are building academic facilities. But the reason I mention that story is because, again, the Kepler graduates populated the work we saw during our week going to 2 different countries. And even a US organization we work with that does movement building is now starting to work in Africa. And the first person they hired was a Kepler graduate. And so I guess my observation to folks is there's many on-ramps to take on this work, but really truly believing that the individuals themselves and allowing them to find their own power. And some of that is through very traditional means, and some of that is actually just through people being in fellowship together, I think actually builds collective power that's quite important.
But just to be clear, you're saying 2 things. You're saying that leaders matter, but so do institutions. Every one of those people, right? Because
That is
what Paul Farmer and Jim Kim always said is, don't get fascinated by us as the new silver bullet. That's why partners, they always made the case that they have to build the capacity of partners in health,
Yes.
just as you did, Wendy, with Teach for America. Platforms were fortified and made durable with unrestricted, general operating, multi-year support. No, I know because each
Yes.
of these groups we funded, and I'm just saying,
Yes.
each of those leaders will tell you, because often we donors get fascinated. We see someone on a stage and we say, I want to give them money. And that's the problem that we have in our community, is and especially with individual donors, you get fascinated with an individual and then you don't want to support their institutional platform. And the very best leaders, as we have here, have all made that case very well.
And I guess the one other observation I'll make is, and there are also leaders that want to build institutions that interact with the larger institutions in which they sit.
Exactly.
The ministries of health, the ministries of education, the corporations in the communities where they work. There isn't a sense of cowboyness. There is a sense of building rapport and community and pulling in resources and actually sharing. There's a lot of mutuality in that with the larger institutions that sit in the places where they work.
Thank you for all of that, and especially Anne-Marie for bringing to life all these very specific examples of how intentionally cultivating people ends up having many ripple effects through all of these institutions. Karen, I'm thrilled that you're here. I know some of the people on the panel have had an amazing role in your own trajectory, but tell us about your experience building Emerging Leaders Foundation and the impact that you've seen from this work.
Thank you, Wendy. I am so excited to be here. Article 1 of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights says that all human beings are born equal and free in dignity and rights and must act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood, sisterhood, dignity, and rights. There's a South African word that I love so much. It's called sawubona. Sawubona. Sawubona means I see you. I realize that there's something so powerful about being seen for who you are. And when you're seen, you can also be heard. Would you just turn to your neighbor and tell them, I see you? I see you. I see you, Darren.
I see you.
And yes, I see you, and we see each other. Now, I say this because this is the core of why I started Emerging Leaders Foundation. This is the core of why I have taken time to invest in myself as a leader and to invest in other young leaders who are upcoming. I grew up in poverty back in Kenya, in a village in the western part of Kenya. And if you have seen poverty or smelled poverty or felt poverty or watched it, it has a sense of dehumanizing individuals. It takes away something from you. It eats away at the core of your being. My dad always told me, you know, Karen, when you get a chance to go to school, give it your all, because that will be the key for yourself and for us as a family out of poverty. And I did give it my all, but I believe, looking back, that just having a dream and being hopeful that tomorrow would be better kept me questioning and asking questions. How come some families have more than they need, even for a lifetime, while other families are barely scratching the surface, barely making it? Yet all those families live in one society under the same leadership. And as I kept asking the question, why? Why is this the way it is? Why this, why that? Why the huge inequalities? For me, the answer was leadership. That the quality of life that people live is determined and directly proportional to the quality of leaders that they have. And at that point, I decided, you know what? I want to be a better leader. I want to learn leadership. I read books, talked to people, got mentored, got into student leadership, student politics, and then at some point started serving at the government level, serving on boards here and there. And it's in the course of this journey that I encountered something so powerful at the African Union Heads of State Summit. Something was birthed in me. I was representing young Africans through the African peer review mechanism. And I sat in this room full of heads of states, very powerful people making decisions about their countries. And some things were so amiss. Number one, there was only one woman, and that was President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. And then number two, there were no young people in the room. They were men and old men. And I asked the question, so what would happen to Kenya, to African countries, if only we had leaders who truly cared about people and put people first in their policy formulation, policy development, execution? Then Africa would be great, Kenya would be great. And at that point, something was birthed in me. A fire was sparked in my belly to go back home and start a platform that would actually mentor young leaders, especially in the civil society, in the private sector, to lead change, to be the positive change makers they want to see. And I started Emerging Leaders Foundation. And you know what? I actually knew it was gonna take quite some bit of sacrifice, but I didn't know the pain I was gonna experience and go through at the start of the journey. Maybe had I known that, maybe I would never have started in the first place. Year one, no funding. Year two, no funding. And I'm meeting investors, funders, and I'm selling the vision about a dignified society with values-based leaders. And many funders are like, no, leadership takes time to see results. We can't fund and invest in leadership. Year two, Year 3, nothing. Year 4, nothing. And at this time, I said, okay, maybe let me get into consultancy and make some money then, finance the leadership development work. So started training. I'm also a leadership coach. So started coaching, training, mentoring, making some money. And I was so passionate about this work that most of the time, I would actually take care of the needs of the organization and then forget I also have needs. My family has needs. And in 2015, when I had just come to the end of the road, it was thick. Things were thick. I was investing in this. I was mentoring. And there were some results. I could see young girls coming and saying, oh, I'm now a confident leader. I've been elected, this and that. I have risen ranks in my place of work. But when it comes to financing this work, it was painful. It got to a point where it was hurting me. And at that point, when I was just about to throw in the towel and call it a day, guess what? I encountered Ford Foundation. And told the story, told about the journey, and the officer in charge then asked me so many questions and then said, okay, so what work are you doing? And I said, so right now, we are doing mentorship at the county level, where it matters, at the local level. We are identifying young people who have a voice, who are speaking up, but also working with local youth organizations in the different counties to build their capacities to engage effectively in governance and policy processes. And he said, okay, put that idea down on paper, let's have a conversation. And Ford Foundation was our first funder in 2015. And guess what? This year, in the month of March, we were celebrating 10 years of service and developing young leaders, not just in Kenya, but across the region, because of the support of Ford Foundation. And at the height of COVID, when many civil society organizations, local organizations, and even business people were wondering, okay, what about tomorrow? What do I do? How do I sustain the impact and the work I've been doing for all these years? And there was some sense of hopelessness. Ford Foundation, through a fund called Build Fund, came to us and said, we've watched, you do this work, and, there's this opportunity. We did apply, went through a rigorous interview process, and got a multi-year 5-year unrestricted funding for institutional building. That even for me right now, if I were to exit the stage, the work of Emerging Leaders Foundation goes on because the systems are there, structures are there, policies are there, the board is there because of the work the Ford Foundation has done to support us. And what is most amazing about the work I do right now, Wendy, as you introduced me, you said I am the Executive Director of Emerging Leaders Foundation, and I am the Interim Executive Director of Emerging Public Leaders. So through the work we have done at Emerging Leaders Foundation, for instance, in the last elections, we had 3 young people getting elected to serve as members of county assemblies to make laws and policies at the local level and make a change at the local level. And something that is really beautiful about, for instance, the work of EPL, Emerging Public Leaders, and the work of Emerging Leaders Foundation is that we have found shared values and we are collaborating. The work President Salif talked about, that we launched the Public Service Emerging Leaders Fellowship Program in Kenya. It was in partnership with Emerging Leaders Foundation and Emerging Public Leaders. And together, we are approaching the whole question of sustainable development and sustainable change in society at all levels, civil society, community level, and all that. And through EPL, the work of investing in leaders within government is also happening. Yeah. Because there's nothing as powerful as scaling within government and for government and through government, because then governments do exist to create an enabling environments for citizens to thrive. And one of the most powerful offices in any society, it's not that of the head of state, it's actually that of the citizen. Yeah. So when we get to empower the citizens and ensure that government, the public servants within government are actually addressing and responsive to the needs of the public and looking at policies that are citizen-centric, looking at serving the people through integrity and public service ethos and ethics, like that is really powerful, because that is where we get to see sustainable change and sustainable development. Because who we are as individuals and as leaders really matters. And the people we lead and serve also that really makes the whole difference. Thank you.
Karen, first of all, thank you for. I think many people ask what we really mean by a people-first approach, and Karen just brought to life both what we really mean and the challenge and how under-resourced this people-first work really is. President Sirleaf wants to come in, and Darren, I know, needs to run off, so I'm going to ask you one final question.
Yeah,
Okay,
I
go
just
ahead.
want to make one point. Because we talk about community health workers, we talked about EPL and all of that, but we forgot one thing. It's the women that make it work. Yeah. 85% of community workers are women. And the women who have had the best approaches to COVID-19, to Ebola, have been the women leaders. And so one of the things we have to do, we know we cannot be discriminatory when we get in these programs. They have to be people first and include everybody. But we've got to find a way to focus on how do we address the many years of discrimination against women that have not enabled them to take policy-making, high-level leadership roles where they can make a difference in constitutional, in legal rights, to ensure that they can ensure gender equity prevails. So I just want you to know, Darian, that in all of this, we support all of these programs, but let's also think that we're going to have to support some programs that enhance women. And we thank you
Well,
for what you've done.
I deserve no thanks. I deserve no thanks. But I do think, Madam President, you know, the notion of gender and centering gender is critical.
Yeah.
And thank you for raising it. I mean, one of the things I'll be doing shortly is making a phone call to another donor on behalf of something that was launched by a group of grassroots African women called the Black Feminist Fund. Now, the Black Feminist Fund is a fund that we and others have helped seed with its mission and remit to have Black African women making grants to other African women-led organizations.
Terrific.
Doing the very work you're talking about in broad verticals. The challenge is getting donors to wrap their head around giving unrestricted support to a group of African women to do this kind of, so it is, I can only tell you not because I'm some special person, because I'm really not. I'm just lucky enough to be president of the Ford Foundation and stewarding this place for a while, but I'm just me. But one of the things I've learned in spinning the shoe leather, going door to door to my donor colleagues, my other foundation president colleagues, is there is just a mindset that we have to identify, name it, surface it, and address it. And I mean, there's one person who, I'll give $1 million. You can give $10 million. I mean, come on. It's not, I mean, and so that's the other part of it, which is the sort of tokenism that comes with, oh, well, it's Africa, sure, I'll put me in for $1 million.
Yeah.
And I just think we have to really push and in a thoughtful and respectful way, because people have choices and options, and there are lots of good things to give to. But again, going back to where we started, don't espouse this rhetoric if you don't mean it. Yeah. And so that needs to be part of the mantra here, because the easy part is to say, again, we're people first. Actually, the message should be, don't say you're people first unless you really mean it.
Darren, thank you so much. I mean, so many of our discussions in the People First community come back to this question of mindsets, and just basically the mindset of we need to change our own mindsets about where change needs to come from. And there are so many barriers, like in our development community. So thank you for that. I'm curious what else you think holds us back from taking a people first approach. Anne-Marie, do you have thoughts on that?
I mean, I do. I realize I'm the only person without a mic.
No, you're not. Here you go. No.
Oh, good.
You got it.
Oh, thank you
got
so
one
much.
for you.
And I always, and I know Darren feels this way too. You hate to go toward things with a sense of negativity. So I thought I'd maybe talk more about how we've done the work, because I feel like we've listened and learned over time. But I want to unpack general operating grants more. General operating grants mean that whatever the next best use of a dollar is, the leader and the leadership team of that organization gets to make that choice. They get to build infrastructure. They get to, over time, build the systems and build the team that they feel is important. And they get to go after the opportunities in their work that they see as the most important, that maybe someone else won't give money to.
And as a donor, you have to be willing to cede control.
You have to cede control.
It's like that's the issue.
You have to actually
Just to be
you
clear.
have to know you never had control. I mean, it was just someone that came to your office and asked for money. They could walk out without your money. So you never had control. We do all multi-year grants. And why do people do multi-year grants? Because change takes time. If every year you feel like you have to describe what happened, and it's not like we don't say, like, send us your annual report. That's another thing. We don't ask for formal reporting. We get other people's reporting. If you wrote a report for somebody else, we're happy to read that report. We also find it quite entertaining when people don't even take off the name of the person they sent the report to before. That makes us feel like it's really working. But multi-year support is important because, yes, along the way it's helpful to share. But as I said, you have to work in a place for quite a while in a leadership-based model till you begin to see the patterns of change occurring, quite possibly. I'll also say one of the other pieces is I think there's such disjuncture between the people who are in the field doing the work, the person at a place that's in a position to be able to allocate resources, learning about the work. Then they tell somebody, then it gets to this decision maker. It's maybe on a piece of paper. It doesn't really capture the imagination. You lose the decision chain. So I think any way you can collapse decision chains, I think, can often really help. Another observation I'd make is I think often the timing on some of these things is quite slow. And so again, pieces around momentum and opportunity get lost because time passes. So I'll use us as an example, but it's only one example. We have grant-making meetings every 2 weeks. And there's a dozen managing directors at Emerson Collective that participate in that process because we're committed to moving money and in a responsive way. One other thing I'll mention, and it's more a frame, is once folks are in, and this is one of the things Darren said, you have to commit at the beginning, and then you got to commit at the middle, and then you got to commit at the, well, maybe there's not an end. Like, that's kind of the power of some of this. But where is the power that an organization with resources has? It's in who they know. It's in what they've learned over time. So the pieces around how can you help someone with capacity building? Like, we have a whole menu of democratically offered capacity building supports that everybody who's a grantee gets to work off of. It refreshes every year. It's actually been built through the responsiveness of folks in the portfolio that have said, I wish I had more legal support. I wish I had someone that could teach me storytelling. I wish I had someone that could teach management training to our team. So over time, we've just built that list. And we call it Beyond the Grant because in the early years, people would say, so does this come out of my grant money? And we'd say, no, it's beyond the grant because we really wanted that to be really understood. And then it's the coaching. It's the bringing in someone to moderate a hard board conversation. And so then I guess the other piece is it's listening. It's being in enough communication that when folks say, in more of an aspirational way or a problem-solving way, this is what is happening, a person can wheel back and say, if that is happening, would this be helpful? Entirely optional. Maybe you want it now, maybe you want it in 6 months, but let's put that on the table as an option and really keep curating those opportunities. And so I think in the end, it comes down to a combination of listening and trust. Those, I think, are the big building blocks of that kind of change. But I honestly think it's a place the field can move, regardless of your legal structure, regardless of your decision-making structure. I think people can go there, but it is a lot about seeding what you believe to be true because you often don't really know very much at all.
Thank you so much, Anne Marie. I think this question of control is a huge piece. Like, if you're really taking a people-first approach as a government multilateral or as a philanthropist, you are saying we're going to invest in the development of people and let them lead the change rather than I want them to do what I want them to do. And I think that is maybe the biggest barrier we face. That's just my personal
On that
perspective.
point, just in fairness, depending on the donor, so let's just say USAID. USAID depends on the support from the United States Congress. They want control. Right? So just to be clear, the United States Congress is not going to go along with an idea, just give a group of Africans money and let them decide what they want to do with it. I'm sorry. I mean, I would love to live in a country where I want to, on behalf of people, particularly in government, who have to answer to a senator on the Foreign Relations Committee whose staffer is saying to him, if you don't use this Excel spreadsheet to get a report and do monitoring, the senator is not going to vote for your appropriation. Right? So that's the reality that our friends, who many of whom agree with us, but who themselves face a reality of their own budgeting processes and the financing of the work that they want to do. So I want to be respectful. Donors are in very different places. I answer to a board of trustees. You know, when I became president, they said, well, we can't make multi-year grants because the trustees only approve annual budgets.
Yeah.
And as my former board chair, Kofi Apenting understands, I said, why can't the board approve multi-year budgets? I mean, who says a foundation board? And Kofi said, we can, if we actually want to, just change the rules, change the policy. So my point is, if the mindset, you know, I mean, we come up against these sort of ways of operating, ways of doing business that are rooted in legacy, and what leaders who can have to do is to do radical things. But I don't think we're going to be able to expect someone at USAID to get Congressman X to go to do what the Ford Foundation does.
Yeah.
The United States Congress does not do multi-year budgeting. They
I
don't.
hear you.
It's a matter of law. They don't.
I think what's interesting is, I mean, we all are part of so many discussions right now about the importance of localization, and everyone from USAID, I mean, I think there's huge recognition that we need locally led development. And I think our point in the People First community is, you know, we do need locally led development, but that means more than just getting the money to the local people. It means we need to make intentional efforts to cultivate the leadership development of local people. We need to expose them to what's working in other contexts so that we have development that is both locally led and globally informed. We feel that the idea of investing in leadership development is way too absent from the discussion. So even USAID, they want to cede control, and the question is how to do it, and we're saying investing in the local leadership development is a big piece of that. Like, probably everyone here has been to the Aspens or the next things. Like, we invest in the leadership development of a tiny elite of usually Westerners. And we're saying, let's invest all that leadership development energy in local, diverse people in the developing context where we need to see sustainable development. So with that, and I know we're running out of time, last words. So if you had the mic and you were talking to all those heads of state over there in some direction at the UN, what word of advice would you have for them sort of as it relates to this discussion? Karen, you want to start?
Okay.
Wow, I would say investment in leadership equals to sustainable change. And I look at investment in leadership, I liken that to growing a bamboo tree. When you grow a bamboo tree, it takes about 9 months for it to sprout from the ground. Then it takes about 4 years to mature. And then after that, you will keep harvesting and harvesting and harvesting and harvesting, you know, like forever. And that is the same thing with investing in leadership. It takes time to handhold leaders, to coach them, to mentor them, to have difficult conversations, to give feedback, to support them to become secure individuals, to then make it possible for collaboration and partnership to happen. But the moment you invest in that leader, in that one leader, who then invests in another, and we create a multiplier effect, that leads to sustainable change. So I would say let's prioritize investment in leadership development. Thank you.
I would simply say, if you want a future for your country, invest in young people, women and girls. That's the future of your country.
I'm not sure I have much to add because because I feel like investing in leaders is really powerful. And I was just going to add the listening piece, just to really underscore the listening piece. I think so much of what we need, we know. And in fact, very specific people are more invested in that knowledge, women and young people in particular. And I think it's not just opening our hearts, because actually opening your heart is important. It's opening your head. It's opening those very specific beliefs that you have about how things work or how things change or how things don't change, and listening with that mindset of possibility.
I'll second your motion about listening to the people. Respect their priorities. Give them the opportunity to take charge. Stop all the analysis and evaluations and all those things that they go through before they get a project proposal. Take some risks so that those who are learning and those who are building may sometimes falter and may need to be re-supported until they build that capacity. And so my final word is, like everyone said, in all of this, those who do it best are women.
I think we're going to give President Sirleaf the last word here. Thank you all for joining. I hope everyone will keep reflecting on what it means in each and every one of our own work to take a people-first approach. And we hope you'll join our people-first community. Be sure to grab one of those cards with the QR code, and you can see the working paper and sign up to be part of the community and engage in learning experiences over time. So thank you, everyone, and thank you, wonderful panelists.